Hello again. Since today is St. Patrick's Day, I thought it might be interesting to remind ourselves of the fact that he was in fact from what is now England. He wasn't Irish at all. Even more interesting, particularly for those who are obsessed with the transatlantic slave trade, is the fact that Patrick was seized by slave traders from where he lived in northwest England near what is now Carlisle, and sold as a slave to an Irish farmer. He was 16 at this time. All this happened in the 5th century AD, not long after the last Roman soldiers had been withdrawn from Britain. Slavery was so common and unremarkable in Europe at this time that nobody ever really stopped to think about the circumstances which led to St. Patrick's association with Ireland. The other patron saint of Ireland is of course St. Bridget of Kildare. Her mother Brocha was a slave as well. Bridget herself was born into slavery. So there you have it, the two chief patron saints of Ireland, both slaves. This is all a bit odd really, for a generation which has been indoctrinated with the idea that slaves are black. Who knew that slavers were operating on the English coast as early as the 5th century AD? Even more intriguing is the fact that Ireland was for centuries the centre of the slave trade in Europe. Forget Liverpool and Bristol and their connections with the slave trade. It's at Dublin, Limerick and Waterford that we should be focusing on this day, St. Patrick's Day. All three of those cities were founded originally as slave trading settlements. What, you didn't know this? Why yes, Dublin was founded in 841 by Vikings who wanted a handy base for exporting English slaves to North Africa and the Middle East. Limerick and Waterford were both established for the same purpose. At that time, of course, slavery was big business in England, slavery of English people, that is, and Vikings were buying and capturing people wholesale and transporting them to camps in Ireland, ready to sell on to other countries. Ireland's involvement in the slave trade was really, really big business. It was the principal business of the country. It was common in the 5th century when Patrick and St. Bridget were slaves, and it accelerated in the 9th century, carried on for 200 or 300 years more. If we are going to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, then let's make it a celebration too of the slavery which he endured as an Englishman in Ireland. I mention all this because at a time when there is talk of reparations being demanded by African Americans for the suffering of their ancestors, perhaps it's time for English people to ask who will compensate them for their experience of slavery, on behalf of their ancestors, of course. Should it be the Irish who were snatching boys like Patrick from the shore of England in the 5th century? Or perhaps the Danes, who were doing the same thing between the 9th and 11th centuries. With everybody in England keen to examine the role which ports like Liverpool played in the transatlantic slave trade, perhaps it is time for the Irish to think about the part that their capital city played in the trade in English slaves. Or do you think that Limerick and Waterford will be changing street names or anything to acknowledge their historical role in the slave trade? If we're going to talk about slavery, then I think St. Patrick's Day is a very good time to initiate a conversation about the subject of slavery.